So today I got my apple tree and I'm going to be planting it today. And what I'll do is go over the key highlights of what you need to do to plant your apple tree. And then after I'm done discussing those key steps, what I'll do is go back and give a thorough explanation to each of those steps. So for those of you who want clearer and more detailed explanation, you can listen to the whole video. So number one, after taking this apple tree and getting it out of the box, it came as a bare root apple tree, which means that only the roots are included. It is not planted in, like, for example, a pot. So it came as a bare root. And step number one, you will need to soak the roots for anywhere between 2 and 6 hours, but no more than 6 hours. Step number two, you're going to put this in a pot that's going to be anywhere from 18 to 22 inches, and it has to have at least 4 drainage holes. Number three, you want to go ahead and use a potting mix soil. You can mix your own with 25% perlite, 25% vermiculite, 50% potting mix, a little bit of peat moss, and maybe a cup or two of compost soil. And then you'll mix in about 1 to 2 cups of fruit tree fertilizer. Now, if this is too difficult for you to obtain all these materials, or you just don't want to do that, you can go ahead and use 100% potting mix. And 100% potting mix is just fine. This will get you what you need to get done. Once you get the soil ready, make sure you mix it all together well. And you're going to go ahead and wet the mix before you put it into the pot. Then once you have the soil ready and you put the mix into the pot, you will go ahead and water it thoroughly. And the watering schedule for step number 4 is basically once every 1 to 2 days you will water this plant thoroughly. And then after about a couple weeks, if you see new growth, then you can go ahead and taper to a normal watering schedule, which is basically anytime the soil is semi-dry, the first 2 to 3 inches, then you'll go ahead and water it. So that is a brief overview of what you need to do to plant your apple tree. Now let me go back and kind of give you a detailed explanation of each step. Now when your tree comes, whether it's bare root or in a pot, especially in a bare root situation, you will need to soak these roots because it needs to absorb some extra water before it gets planted into a pot or into the soil. Now, over the years, I've received a number of different fruit trees and apple trees, and have noticed that when the roots are soaked for about 2 hours, I usually get faster growth in the tree itself. I've had situations where I didn't soak the roots at all. There's some situations where I soaked it for 1 hour. There's situations where I soaked it 2 hours, and there's situations where I soaked it for 6 hours. And from my experience over the last 5 years of planting about 3 to 5 fruit trees every year, I've noticed that the 2 hour mark is about what needs to happen in order to get the most amount of growth. And so what I do is I set a timer and I soak my roots exactly about 2 hours. And it is crucial that if you're busy or you run some errands, that you do make sure that you don't leave them soaking for more than 6 hours. That's not very good for the tree. So step number 1, you'll soak the roots, if it comes as a bare root tree, for at least 2 hours. And from there you can go to the next step. Now if the tree comes to you in a pot, you don't have to soak it, but I do thoroughly water it and let it absorb any additional water until I get the pot and the soil mixture put together. So step number 2 is selecting the pot. Now, typically for pots, especially potting apple trees and fruit trees, I like to use I like to spend the extra money and buy either a grow pot, what they're called Grow Pro Root Master Pots, which is this one, or I'll buy air pot. Now I'll pay extra money for these grow pots and air pots because I feel that spending the money, especially for a fruit tree, is very important. Why air pots and grow pots work so well is that they help naturally prune the roots, and also causes it to grow the roots in a good uniform manner without circling and without achieving root balls. So over time, as this tree grows and it gets maybe a little bit too large for the container, it's not going to keep on circling uh, and form root balls, which are hindering to the plant and also hurts the plant or hurts the tree. And so spending a little bit extra money for grow pots and air pots are well worth it for fruit trees. Now, for vegetable gardens, when you're only growing something for a whole season, it's not as important. But I feel like if you can afford it and you have the ability to purchase a air pot or a Grow Pro Root Master pots, I think it's well worth it. If you use a normal pot, make sure that it's at least 18 to 22 inches for a dwarf apple tree or any regular apple tree. If it's a regular apple tree, of course, you're going to have to go ahead and pot up over time and make sure that there's a minimum of 4 drainage holes. There's been a lot of studies done through universities, and I think the first university was Ohio State University, stated that through a study that it really needs 4 drainage holes in order for it to be successful in terms of draining water properly. I bought a dwarf apple tree here today. It's called a dwarf gala apple tree. And this tree is going to be growing to a height of about 8 to 10 inches. Now, for me personally, I want to keep this tree about 8 feet tall, which these type of pots are going to help me do that a little bit more successfully than a traditional pot. And the reason why I'm trying to keep mine under 8 feet is because then that way in the wintertime I can keep it under the roof overhang, and it'll stay out of the rain and the wind is a little bit better. Apple trees and fruit trees can get fungus growing on its limbs, even in dormancy through wind and too much rain. Plus, although I'm going to have good drainage soil in my mix, constant rain in my zone, which is 8B in Washington, will continually saturate my soil, and I rather have it not sitting in wet feet, which is not good for any type of fruit trees. So if I can go ahead and push it under a overhang for most of the winter, the tree will be a lot healthier. Getting to step number 3, the soil. If you want to do the simpler method, you can easily do 100% potting mix, which is perfectly fine. For me, I already have the items already, and so I'm going to go ahead and do the 25% perlite. Then I'm going to do 25% vermiculite. I'm going to mix in about 50% potting mix, and I'm also going to incorporate a little bit of peat moss into the mix, and I also put in about a cup or 2 of compost mix, which helps give the apple trees a little more nutrients. Once I mix this all together in pre-wet conditions, meaning that I've already wet this soil before putting it into these pots, what I'll do is go ahead, and after I mix it well, I'm going to go ahead and also mix in about a cup to 2 cups of fruit and citrus fertilizer into the mix to help it go through its growing cycle earlier. Once I've potted this apple tree, I will go ahead and finish it off with sprinkling about a cup of azomite on the top layer, and then I will water very well. And then every 1 to 2 days, I will go ahead and continue to water until I see new growth. Once I see new growth and I see that the leaves have started shooting out of this tree, then I'll go ahead and go back to its normal watering cycle, which is basically maybe about once a week, maybe a little bit more frequently on a hotter day. But basically anytime the soil beyond the first 2 or 3 inches feel semi-dry or dry, I'll go ahead and water it. Now, throughout the cycle, throughout the year, you're going to have to go ahead and do some other things to take care of your apple trees, such as pruning, which occurs usually late winter to early spring before budding. Um, Also, you're going to go ahead at that time, after the pruning, you're going to go ahead, and it suggests that you use horticulture oil and dormancy oil, and spray your tree and your limbs and your and trunk. This will help kill off any insects that have burrowed into the bark and is sitting there ready to grow in the springtime. Now, after the horticulture oil, what I'm going to also do is I'm going to spray this tree with neem oil as it goes into the spring cycle. And then throughout its growing period, if I have more bug infestation issues, then I will actually use an insecticide. Now, what I'm going to do is post another video that talks about horticulture oil, neem oil, and insecticide slash bug spray, and I'll give you a kind of a full rundown of how you need to take care of your spraying cycle for fruit trees and apple trees, along with how you take care of your fertilizing. Now, with apple trees, I like to fertilize twice a year. I'll fertilize right early in the spring and midway through the year after the fruit has set to help it develop the fruit. But after it's already flowered and the fruit has already set, then I will go ahead and add the fertilizer after that period. And I'll explain that a little bit more in detail in the next video discussing the apple tree maintenance and the horticulture oils and sprays. Hopefully this helps, and best of luck with your apple planting.